Well, why don't we get started? Good morning, everybody. I'm John Casper with the Chamber, and welcome again to our third part of the Leading from the Top series, featuring differentiating strategies. Joe Thompson and Vicki Updike are with us once again. So welcome, Joe and Vicki. Thanks for being with us. Today's conversation is about communication and conflict. We've been building on this over the last 3 weeks, so this will be a nice culmination of the previous 2 weeks. People are muted, and I think if anyone has questions, please use the Q&A or the chat tab. I think Vicki will be monitoring that and asking those questions as we go through. So I think we're recording this session. It'll be on our website, and the link will be sent out to participants, so be looking for that. And with that, Joe, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, John. Good morning, everybody. Our goal, as it is has been in the last 2 sessions, is to leave you with 1 or 2 specific things that you can do in your business, in this case, to be a better communicator. As John has mentioned, I'll be having the front room, Vicki will have the back room, and she'll be watching for any questions you have. In addition, if there's some thing that you want to go into a little bit deeper, we do offer a complimentary 1-hour video conference if you wanted to get together and had anything else you'd like to talk about. Let's start by talking about the language of leadership. Language can be an aid or can be an impediment in communication. And the more time we spend with a person or a group of people, the better we are at understanding each other, the language both verbally and non-verbally. And you've all been part of teams and families and organizations, and where you face enough challenges, you pretty much get to know what people mean by different things. And you end up developing a cohesiveness that's held together by a shorthand of language. And a nod, thumbs up, just a few words, even an acronym, can communicate things to everybody else in the group, and it's clear, they understand. But sometimes when you have patterns disrupted, communication can be disrupted as well. And in these situations, that's really where we need to be the leaders. And we need to be setting and modeling what kind of behavior activity that we expect. And that might be something that involves full engagement. It might be something that involves being involved with a dispute. There may be some things that you have to get involved in or you have to do that you may not have normally done as part of the normal course of business. But if we want to align, if we want to obtain the goals we're after, make good decisions, delegate authority, and do some of the other things we have been talking about as leaders, we need to be good communicators as well. So let's talk about what that means. Communication is a process. It's not an event. It's not an email. It's not a tweet. It's not a sign or a poster. Those things are all ways of conveying messages. But communication itself, successful communication, is a process that results in a shared understanding. And so when we go to communicate, we should be looking at not what we did, but we should be looking at what we accomplished. Did we come away with a shared understanding sufficient for us to be able to get the results that we were looking for by having that communication? In the picture there, you can see just because the sender has a very well organized message doesn't mean it doesn't end up looking like spaghetti for the receiver. When I was younger, I flew as a private pilot. And in the course of doing that, we had a very specific language that we used. And everybody that was involved in aviation, the tower, the grounds people, the pilots, we all knew what that language was. And so we had a very concise, very efficient way of communicating unambiguously what was going on. But that was because all of us had been immersed in the training and the experience of flying. And that allowed us to be able to have that connection. And you could always tell when somebody was new at this because they weren't speaking the lingo, and you usually ended up, if they were in a tower situation, with people asking them a lot of questions, just trying to make sure that we're clear on what we're doing. Sometimes Vicki and I have had an opportunity to work with a lot of clients who have invested a lot of resources in developing a plan or a sales presentation, addressing a customer request, maybe it's ordering materials, and they spent a lot of time preparing this thing. And were really careful in the way that they presented it, and then ended up being disappointed because in the end they didn't have that shared understanding. But what had happened in some of those cases is they had gone off by themselves as a small group and prepared that strategy or that presentation or whatever. And then for the folks that were receiving it, this is the first time they're receiving it. So even though it's clear in the minds of the folks that's sending it, it isn't necessarily clear in the minds of the people that are receiving it. So one of the things that we need to watch out for with communication is that it actually has a counterfeit. And one of the things that is tough for us right now, was tough before, is tougher now, is technology makes it so easy to either access or to share information. And rather than communicating, a lot of times what we do is we substitute information and we call it communication. So we tell people that we sent them an email, we tell them they should have looked at the video, we tell them that was in the corporate handbook, we tell, and point them to communication, or excuse me, to information. And we assume that that's going to communicate. But the problem is, has anyone has anyone misunderstood the information that we're setting? Has the information gone unnoticed? Maybe it's sitting in a mailbox, hasn't been touched. Has information that seemed absolutely clear been turned around and used as justification for doing something other than what you intended? Informing doesn't equal shared understanding. And yet we need to be able to inform in order to communicate. So there's a step we need, but we need to take it beyond that and make sure we have a shared understanding. And communication doesn't have to involve verbal communication. So this is not a suggestion to go back to the phone age, but we know that the more prior experience that we have, the more it puts us in a situation where we're going to be able to have more confidence in what we say being understood by those who are listening. But conversely, if we're in a situation where there isn't a lot of understanding, especially in situations like ours where we have a lot of information available, we need to be thinking a little bit about what we're doing before we go ahead and make that communication. Sometimes we
So I think, Joe, before we get there, one of the things that we always like to talk about when it comes to communication is that on the receiving side of information, that is a valuable part of the communication process. So listen for understanding, not listen for correct or trying to find ways to persuade them to your thinking. Communication is truly just trying to understand each other's perspectives and get that shared understanding. So listening is a big component of that, and verifying that the message was received. So you as a receiver of a message should be doing those things to ensure that the message was received correctly as well.
And just emphasizing that point that Vicki made, communication is a shared understanding. You don't have to have agreement. All you're trying to do is get shared understanding. And a lot of times where it gets complex is where people try to persuade at the same time that they're communicating. Persuading and coming to a resolution on things is another step. And when you try to do too many things at once, that ends up with creating confusion. It also ends up sometimes with creating resentment, people feeling like they're not being listened to, disenfranchisement. Other things happen when we don't focus on making sure that we have that shared understanding before we take an excursion and head off working on things like resolving issues. There's a lot of books on communication. There's courses on communication that you can take. A lot has been done. People have different gimmicks that they use for it. But when you strip it down to its basics, what it is a sender is preparing and delivering. Preparing a message is what it is I want to say. The content is how am I going to convey that? And then the verification is a means of being able to understand that the person or persons that we're sending this to really understand it. So when you look at it, the message is a key. What's the intent of what you're trying to do? Is it to inform, and then there's no other action that's required? Is there some kind of call to action? And what is that? Is it an exercise in authority, where you're assigning an outcome or delegating the use of a resource? Are you establishing some kind of boundary or some kind of rule or expectation for people? Are you trying to transfer knowledge so that they have information that can be applied in a way that generates value? Are you teaching some kind of new skill? Are you trying to convey emotion or some other feeling that's associated with this? Is this something that you've prepared, or is this something that's coming that's visceral and maybe has more of an element of freeze, flee, or fight associated with it? So as a participant, consider your intent as a sender before you send the message, especially, again, if you're not familiar with the message or if the message is somewhat new. And if you're the receiver of this message, if one of your folks is talking to you, make sure that you're taking the time to clarify that you understand what the intent is that they have and what they're really looking for. And that can be done in blunt ways, and it can be done more softly too. Depends on the situation, depends on the people that you're working with, but to be able to understand what that intent is that they're trying to accomplish is important, because how many times do you get into the conversation and ask the question, so, are you expecting me to do something, or are you just venting? A lot of people say, well, so how do we get people to do that? It starts with you as the leaders. If you're modeling that behavior, if you're setting that expectation that there's going to be these kind of steps taken, you don't have to lay out the steps, but you do have to model the behavior. The expectation could be that they communicate with you and you just turn around and say, let me repeat back what I just heard to make sure we understand that. So you're in a position without doing anything as far as any formal training, but to be able to do it through exhibiting leadership. So when you look at
we had a question from the group just saying, what are the books that you would recommend for effective communication? The one that I would say, Radical Candor by Kim Scott has, it really is a way to, to communicate authentically, but get your point across firmly. I don't know what you would, if there's other ones that you would recommend, Joe.
Another one I think is the Harvard Negotiation Project, really talk about having difficult conversations. And that really deals with having issue-based conversations. Also being able to be clear on what we're trying to do when we come out of the conversation. A lot of conversations end up being something, somebody's communicating something and they want something. It might be information, it might be whatever, but making sure that that is clear and that you can do that in a way where both sides end up with the win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so often communication is seen as I need to convince you of something, and that's not necessarily the point of communication. Communication is to make sure that there is truly that shared understanding. In the communication might be a request to do something, but then you have to ensure the receiver of that information knows what it is they need to get done, or what is that transfer of accountability or responsibility. So the communication process needs for you to hear back that they have received the message that they have to get something done and that they have agreed to do it.
Right. When you're trying to resolve, that's really part of a confrontation. And we can talk about that in another session. It has a different kind of dynamic to it. But
absolutely.
What's tough is when people come in and they try to confront and you have not established that shared understanding. And that's frustrating. And when people get frustrated, then the emotional piece gets involved and it just really gets messy and off track.
Mm-hmm.
And so if somebody is confronting about something and you ask them, what are we trying to do here? And they say, well, I think we need to resolve this. Take a step back and ask them, so before we do that, why don't we just figure out what this is? Because I want to make sure that I'm paying attention and that I'm attending to whatever it is that you're interested in talking about here.
Mm-hmm. I would say that so emotion can sometimes, especially if it's something that you feel strongly about or that you feel is very basic, emotion may overcome the communication process. And it's important that we separate that emotion from the communication. So as Joe mentioned, it's very important that you stick to what is the business issue and clarify again, what is it we're trying to accomplish here? The emotion is going to be a component of it, but set that aside for right now and let's deal with the business issue.
And sometimes if people are really emotional, you just have to either decide, am I going to give them space to just vent for right now and then come back to it in 3 or 4 minutes? Or is this something that we need to set some time for later where everybody's had a chance to maybe prepare and settle down a little bit? And as a leader, you probably have run into situations where you have people that are really passionate about something and they're right there, in your face about it. And those are tricky to handle, and being able to sometimes take the time to back off on it and take a little time so that both of you can come at it again without having all that passion involved is helpful. Sometimes you can't. I mean, if there's a fire alarm, you just have to basically point to the exit and get out. And there are some things that are like that. We're talking about situations where you might be able to take some time because it's going to help you understand and it's going to help them be better in listening when it comes to being able to communicate. And that's part of what we're trying to get at with a slide that's up here right now is when we look at situations where there's a lot of agreement, emotions are pretty steady, the company's done this before, the people have done it before, you've done it before. The thing that we have is part of our routine business. Doesn't have to be every day, but we do it. Things that are concrete. If we can look at a set of numbers or piece of equipment or look at a particular ad campaign we're putting together where there's understanding already about elements of it, where we have things that recur that we've seen before. And when the emotions are cool, those are the times where we've had more past experience. And those are the times when informing and telling using statements allow us to be able to efficiently communicate. When you have change that has occurred, and it could be any number of different kinds of changes. It could be because we're running at 50% capacity and we have to figure out how to do this. It could be because we've introduce new products or services or ways of interacting with the customer that we haven't before. We may have new people that are part of the organization. We may have a new approach to the way that we're doing things. When we have those kind of things happening and we have conflict, when people are excited, either really excited, happy, or excited and anxious, where they haven't done it before, and they lack some of that ability to do it, where it's mission critical, where it may deal more with taking something from a concept to execution rather than a tangible, or where there's several interpretations that might exist, where it isn't quite what we always do, and where that emotion is present. It becomes more important at that point to slow it down. And that may sound like that doesn't make sense, but what we're trying to do is to slow it down enough so that we can do that verification step and have any discussion about misinterpretation before people go out and do a lot of things that expend a resource, that create waste, that create confusion, and that end up taking even more time to go out there and resolve. And there's always going to be times we need to go back and adjust based on things we learned. But the degree to which we can slow down, make sure that we're asking questions as we go through, not only to probe for clarification, but for us to receive questions so that we can understand what people are concerned about. That use of critical thinking, of slowing down, is really important in being able to handle situations that are new, different, or new people that are involved in things. And so if you kind of just keep this in mind as you go forward, be looking for those things when you're bringing a new employee on, when you're starting out with a new way of offering the services or the products that you do. A lot of times we see people that onboard folks, and we don't get involved that much in that sort of stuff because we don't do the HR stuff, but we'll see executives being onboarded where, you know, they're spending like an hour of time with each person as kind of this orientation, but then that may go on for a week or two, but then all of a sudden it's like done. Whereas all these other people have been immersed for long periods of time and have worked together and done these things. What we see is the people who turn around and try to slow that down a little bit, you know, include formal, informal time, let them get together with their peers when the peers are meeting with their teams and begin to see more of what's going on in the organization. They tend to be able to come up to speed and make those contributions a lot faster, even though it was slower getting them up to speed. Vicki, any comments on that? Because you'd had experience with that.
Yeah, you know, I think that was, you know, I mean, in the real world, things move fast, right? And so this whole concept of slowing down sounds ridiculous, but what it is that it allows you to set expectations. It allows you to ensure understanding, so there's not rework coming around on the other side. And that, you know, as a leader, there's so many times that, you know, I would just talk and just give my opinion. And because I was a leader in the organization, was seen as, okay, well, we're going to do this now. And that wasn't even my intent. So, you know, for you to be able to share your intent on what to do with your message is very important, because there is a lot of, and can be some wasted time. And that's where we say, you know, that will slow you down in the future. So to ensure that the message was received as intended as a leader is extremely important.
So an example of this is if you have a high-paced thing going on and somebody brings something up to you, and stops, just count to 5. It's interesting how many times they start talking and talk about something else, that they add information that they may not have had before or had added at first. and you begin to see that the situation is just a little different than when you may have thought, because you were kind of using your experience and saying, well, this must be what it is. And as they unfold a little bit more, you see that there's actually something else to this. And it allows you to make an adjustment. It also allows you to develop the person, to give them a perspective that maybe next time they don't need to come to you, or next time they just address it without even it coming up again. If you model cool, if you model steady and centered, you're going to have other people pinging off of that. If you model rushed, not able to listen, don't have the time right now, people are going to ping off of that too. They're not only going to ping off of you, they're going to be modeling that same behavior with the rest of the team. So if this is a time when you need people on task and cool, make sure that you as a leader is modeling that for them. So we want to do a little bit of an exercise here. This isn't anything too crazy, but we're going to show you a series of pictures. And if you can just kind of take a look at these and note what kind of room you're looking at. So you look at this first one and you go, well, that might be a kitchen area. The second one, it looks like a fire room, family room maybe. Third one, kind of a breezy dining area. And the fourth one, maybe a music room. So if you look at this and you look at these descriptions, let's say we'd send each one of you and said, look at this picture and describe what you see. And then we came back together and we said, okay, what is it? It would be reasonable, expected that people would talk about these various choices or some variants. But the truth of the matter is, because in this case, those are all taken from the same spot in the room. They just face different directions. And so when you look at those different perspectives, you get the idea that it might be a fireplace room or a kitchen or whatever. But by combining all of those perspectives, you get a better picture of what the reality is. And that, when we have different perspectives on the same situation, that's what conflict is. So conflict is not good and it's not bad. It's just people looking at something in a different way. And the role of conflict, the reason that we want to have conflict, is if we were to look at any one of those pictures or any two of those pictures, we would have come away without a comprehensive understanding of what we were dealing with. So when we have communication and we're working with groups, conflict is one of the things that we need in order to reduce the bias in our decision making. The more things are changing, the more likely conflict is going to add value by having you see situations that you might not otherwise see. And so now, as we're going through these challenges that we're facing, there may be people that you're working with that lack seniority, that may not be experts in the area, that might even seem like they're not that into it sometimes, but they may be seeing things that other people aren't seeing, and give you a chance to be able to ground yourself in reality in a way that you might not be able to do if you're relying on a group of experts that all have had the same experiences. Every new idea starts with conflict. I have a number of US patents on different medical devices. Every one of those conflicted with the products that came before it. They were different. We had a different perspective on it. So the old ideas, if we're looking for creativity, if you're looking for innovative ways to approach problem solving, if you're looking for new ideas, new products, new services, new ways of communicating, embrace that conflict. Because as you do that, you're going to be able to engage your team, because that's going to excite them. That's part of listening, is being able to uncover the conflict in your team. Even if you aren't looking for new ideas, if you're able to uncover the conflict in your team, what that allows you to do is you now understand where they're coming from. And when they do that, it lets you know where you need to start in order to be able to communicate with them and arrive at a shared understanding. So one of the things we're asking is, as you communicate with your people, don't feel that at the end of the communication that everybody has to be in a place that they agree and that it's all looking at it the same way. You can agree on intent. In other words, what you're going to try, even if you differ on some of the observations that led up to it. And in fact, if what you try doesn't work, it's beneficial to have people that have other ideas that may not have been able to be tried, that allow you to refine those ideas and get them to the point where they're working for you. Now,
there was a time when I was leading an executive team, and I got feedback from the team that I wasn't letting the conflict happen. And I was a little bit taken back by that. I'm like, so tell me more, is one of those comments but what I come to learn is that the team wanted to vet out each other's perspectives in more detail. And I was shutting down that communication because I didn't want to appear like we're disagreeing. I wanted that we are, we're an executive team that works well together. And so in hindsight and looking back, that leadership style and those facilitations of those discussions, I was being far too directive. And I was not letting that communication happen in those perspectives and allow that conflict to be there, because those are where the healthy outcomes can happen.
If we're going to empower people, we need to be able to allow there to be conflict to occur, because that's the way that they're going to learn, is by being able to bring their perspectives in alignment with what the objectives are. And what's important here, we talked in our first meeting, was keep it about the outcomes, not about the tasks. And this fits right in with that, because they may have a different way of getting it done, but if they can get it done and it falls within the requirements that you have, unless there's some kind of regulatory thing or something that requires it be done a certain way, why not? They may come up with something that's a better outcome or at a lower expenditure of resource than what you've got. Don't feel like conflict is a bad thing. And we can't be as interactive as we were if we were all in the same room. But, ask yourself, when you think about conflict, is that something that you're excited about, or is that something that you kind of worry about? And when you think of ending a topic or a meeting or a discussion, are you comfortable letting that meeting end, even though the other person may be viewing that different than what you do? And can you accept that and still honor the other person, or do you turn away from it, saying, leaving them in a place where, they feel like that, bringing that in and leaving that conflict there is something that's going to be harmful to the team. Now, for a lot of you, or some of you, who may have an aversion to conflict, or may kind of get that feeling in your gut of going, oh, I hope we don't have conflict. What we'd like to suggest is that conflict actually has a counterfeit. And that counterfeit, and we do want to avoid this, is where it becomes not just a sharing of perspective, but because when one or more groups, one or more persons tries to impose their will on others. In one case, what we have is we have a process of communication and trying to come to a shared understanding. That's conflict. Contention is combat. And a lot of times what happens when we have contention is things get labeled right and wrong. They get labeled good or bad. And what we're doing is we're talking about these abstract ideas of good or bad, when a lot of times there's a range of options that each have trade-offs associated with them. And depending on which one of those things we use, we're going to see some benefits and some offsets. And in the end, at the end of a discussion, we can come together on shared intent and still have conflict. We can walk out of a meeting and somebody can turn around and say, well, are you guys all agreed on what to do? And the team can say, yeah, we had some different ideas and we still do. When we talked about them, we knew we had to do something. So we've decided to try A. And we're going to give that our full shot. And if it doesn't work, we have some other ideas that we can bring in and try. I mean, that's an acknowledgement of conflict without anybody imposing their will. But we have a situation where we come out and you say, all right, everybody has to agree that this is exactly what they agreed to. That might inhibit having some of the conversations later that would allow you to improve on that. So when you come in and it's, you got to win this battle, it is more difficult sometimes to do creative problem solving because you're worried about defending your idea more than you are about considering what ideas that we might employ. And that can lead to false choices, a sense that we made the good choice and not the bad choice, rather than we made a choice that has some good points to it and some bad points to it, and that we need to move forward with it a little bit in order to learn how well that's working out.
In another executive team that I was a part of, there are ways that people can shut down the conversation. So I had an executive who would draw the line and say, and just, I will never support it. I just like a hard line. I will not do that. And when you're in the heat of those discussions, it's hard to overcome that. So what we did is created our ground rules for these communication. And one of the ground rules that we came up with in a calmer moment when we were all agreeing is that if someone puts a hard line on something, their opinion no longer is factored into the decision, because they're really giving up on the communication. They have stopped it. They have stopped listening for understanding, and they just put a flat line out there that said, this is all I'm going to do. And essentially, and the team agreed and said, okay, if this, and I can tell you, it never happened again that I saw. And I think that reflection of when you're shutting down conversation, or when you are pretty much just plopping in the contention and saying, it's going to be this way, or I'm not supporting it, was a realization that we can't have that when we're working through issues or decisions as an executive team.
If you look at communication, when you're communicating with somebody, a lot of times the place you start with that communication is conflict. You have differing perspectives on the same situation. And the role of communication really is to arrive at a shared understanding. But that doesn't mean that you have to go ahead and discount any of those other ideas. Some of them may not work in the current situation. You may have several choices that are good ones, but you just only can do one. There's a lot of ways that you can have that discussion without going ahead and creating that sense of right or wrong, or that sense of win or loss. And the more that you're able to do that, the more you're going to be able to engage your people. And the more you're able to engage your people, the more energy that they're going to bring to being able to solve the problems that we're facing. When we looked at these topics, one of the things we were looking at a backdrop of some significant changes that have happened with us recently in all of our businesses. And we just felt these topics, particularly around things like communication and things like the transitional leadership, were things that they're important all the time, but they're particularly important now because we need everything that we can, all the gifts that our teams can bring to the table in order to make things work, because we are going to figure out how to work our way through this. And there will be conflicting ideas, and some of them are going to be ideas that really can benefit us, you know, if we're there understanding them and if we're there listening to them. So Vicki, did we have any other questions or comments come in?
Not yet.
Okay. Basically at this point, we are at the end of what we intended to present. Sometimes this session tends to draw a lot of comments, and this is the first time we've done it over the air. But one of the things that we were interested in is we have touched on some things that we haven't gone into in any detail. And if we need your feedback, if there's interest in doing this on a periodic basis, we also can do other topics. And Vicki and I just kind of put a few together that we've done that may have some application, but we'd really like to understand from you, are there things out there that you either would like to hear more about? And if so, what are some of the questions you would like answered? Or are there just general topics you'd like to hear about? We could go into more on the next step, which is really the constructive confrontation. When you do have the conflict out there, how do we confront and build a stronger team? We can talk about leading culture, because a lot of times we talk about culture and we know what it is, but we don't have words to describe it. And we don't necessarily know what are the levers that we pull as leaders that can influence that culture. One of the things that just consistently comes up for us is the issue of how do I delegate and put in place a culture of accountability. And this is really key, not just to being able to get work done, it's key to being able to develop the people that you have and have them have a greater set of skills that they can bring. So, and we talk about in the first presentation, executive perspective and keeping your head in the coaching box and not down on the field running every play. One of the supporting things that leaders need to be able to do that is to delegate things to people and provide those in a way that it's a development opportunity for them. And then finally, there's the area of critical thinking, and that critical thinking is what we employ when the experiences that we have don't give us a historical answer that may be good for the problem. It's where we really need to observe and make sure that we're analyzing the landscape around us and making those problems. So if there's no other comments on this or this topic, we just wanted to remind you that if you wanted to go into this in more detail, or if there's some things that you'd like to pursue one-on-one, we'd be happy to have that discussion with you. I'd like to extend our gratitude to John and the Oshkosh Chamber for the opportunity to be able to spend this time with you. We would encourage you that if there's some things in here that hit for you that you go, I need to try that, write those things down now and try applying them sometime in the next week, because if you don't, you're going to forget about it. But from what I understand, if you forget about it, John, we still have these up on the website to come back and review.
Right. Well, Joe and Vicki, thank you again. Great series, great discussion. You know, we've done these with differentiating strategies for the last, I don't know, what was it, about 2-3 years now. Usually try to do something in fall and spring. So we'll have conversations with both of you about re-engaging in that in those topics again come fall here. So be looking for that. Again, we thank you for your participation. As Joe mentioned, it is recorded. It will be on our website. Email to that link will be sent to you all. And so with that, thank you for joining us. Thank you again for Joe and Vicki for being part of this series. We've really appreciate your expertise and the insight that you've been providing people. So with that, we will hopefully reconnect and see you soon again on another series. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.